Hello everybody, welcome to the Milledgeville Public Library in Illinois. We have another story for you today. This story comes to us from Europe, and it was written by a man named Hans Christian Andersen, who was from, I believe, Denmark. This is the story about a prince who was looking for the perfect princess. The story of the princess and the bean. Once long ago there was a prince. Now this prince had a lovely kingdom. His parents were ruling over it, but eventually he would become the king when his father died. He didn't want that to happen anytime soon, but he knew that sometime it would. And he knew that it was very hard to rule a kingdom all by yourself. And so he decided that he needed to find a princess to marry who could help him to rule the kingdom when the time came. But you see, he wanted a princess who was, well, at least pretty. Beautiful would be nice, but at least pretty. And he needed a princess who was wise, who could help him to run his kingdom. And he needed a princess who was, well, she had kindness in her heart. She had compassion, and she would help him take care of his people. And so the prince left his kingdom, and he went out traveling to try to find a princess who would be good to help him rule his kingdom. And he came to one kingdom, and there they had a princess who was very beautiful. The problem was, she knew she was beautiful, and she liked to look into her mirror a lot. But the prince thought perhaps she would be nice if there wasn't quite so many mirrors about. And so he asked her to go for a walk in the garden with him. But the princess looked at him and she said, "Walk in the garden? Go outside where the sun could burn my lily-white skin? I don't think so. How about if we walk around the ballroom?" Well, the prince knew that the princess wouldn't even go outside into the royal gardens. There was no way she was going to go out into the kingdom with him and help take care of his people. So he knew she was not the princess for him. And so he traveled on. And he came to another kingdom where the princess was very rich. She had lots of jewelry, diamonds and gold and emeralds and rubies. And when the prince arrived at the kingdom, the princess's parents threw a grand ball and everyone was dressed very nicely. But you see, the prince had talked to the princess before the ball, and she had told him that her ladies-in-waiting were her best friends. But he noticed that when the princess came out to dance at the ball, she had all sorts of glittering jewelry all over her. But her ladies-in-waiting, while they were wearing very nice dresses, weren't wearing any jewelry at all. So he knew that the princess, she was very rich, but she was not very good at sharing her wealth. And so he knew that that was not the princess for him, for he needed to be able to share the things he had with his people in order to take care of them. And so he traveled on. And he came to another kingdom where the princess was very wise, and she sat in the great hall, and she made very wise decisions for her people every day. And the prince thought perhaps this was the princess for him. But then he asked her if she would like to go on a picnic with him. And she said she would. And he said, "Would you like to ride horses and go out to the meadow, or shall we go out to the royal gardens?" And the princess thought about that for a bit. She said, "Well, riding horses out to the meadow would be fun, would be good exercise, but horses are rather smelly. Now, if we go out to the royal gardens, well, that would be fun too. The flowers are beautiful this time of year, but it's not as good exercise." And she continued to think about it and to argue with herself about what would be the better thing to do, and she couldn't make up her mind. And the prince knew that if she could not make up her mind on something so simple as whether she wanted to picnic in the gardens or out in the meadow, there was no way she could make decisions about the big things that they needed to run a kingdom. And so he decided that this was not the princess for him. And so he traveled about to other kingdoms, finding other princesses who were very good in some ways and very not good in other ways. And finally, feeling very sad, he traveled home alone. He had not found his princess. And when he got home, he told his parents all about the troubles he had had trying to find the right princess. And they told him that they were sure that there was a very good princess out there for him somewhere. Perhaps it would just be a little more time before he could find her. Well, shortly after the prince arrived home, a big storm happened. Pounding thunder and flashing lightning and pouring down rain. And in the middle of the storm, there was a pounding at the palace door. And when the servants opened the door, they found a woman standing outside. She was wet from head to toe. The rain was running off her hair like it was a waterfall. The water was running in at the toes of her shoes and out at the heels of her shoes and pouring off of her dress like it was rivers. And she said, "Please, oh please, my carriage has broken and the horses are tired and we simply cannot go any further. Could I stay the night here, please?" And they said, "Well, of course you may." And they brought her in and they put her in the parlor and they set a big fire so that she could dry off a little bit. And then they went to fetch the queen to let her know that she had a guest. Well, when the queen came down to greet her guest, she asked the young woman where she had come from and who she was. And the young woman told her that she was a princess who had been traveling to find some adventures. But she had not expected that she was going to get caught in a rainstorm and that her carriage would break down right in the middle of it. And she just needed somewhere to sleep, and in the morning they would find someone to fix the carriage. Well, the queen was a little surprised to see that this rather bedraggled-looking young woman was a princess. But she took her up and she had the servants help her get a bath, and they gave her some clothing of the queen's to wear while her own was drying. And then the young woman came down to supper. And she talked to the king and the queen and the prince while they were eating supper, and the prince really liked talking to her. And when the supper was over, the prince and the young woman continued to talk and talk and talk. They talked for hours, and the prince really liked her. But she said she was a princess, but that didn't mean she was a real princess. And the prince, he thought perhaps his princess had found him instead of him finding the princess. But they needed to be sure she was a real princess. And so he went to his mother and he said, "Mother, what am I going to do? I really like her. She says she's a princess, but is she a real princess?" And the queen said, "Don't worry about it, son. I'm already taking care of it. I know what to do." And the queen had been taking care of it. In fact, she had ordered a grand bedroom prepared for the princess that was visiting. And then she had gone into the bedroom and she had told the servants to take the mattress off the bed. And on the bottom of the bed, there was a board. And she took a little bean and she put that bean in the middle of the board. And then she said, "All right, now put the mattress back." And they put the mattress back carefully on top of the bean so that it would not move. And then the queen said, "Now, go and fetch 19 more mattresses. I want 20 mattresses on this bed." Now, mattresses in those days were a lot thinner than they are now. And so they put 20 mattresses on the bed, and it was quite a tall bed at that point. But then the queen said, I think we need something more. Go and fetch 20 eiderdown quilts, 20 quilts full of feathers. Go and fetch them and place them on the bed as well. And so the servants went and they fetched the 20 quilts and they placed them on the bed. Well, by the time they were done with that, they needed a small ladder to climb up into the bed, and they left the ladder standing there so that the princess could get into the bed at night. When it came time to go to bed at night, the queen took the princess to the room and she said, "Here you are, my dear. We've prepared a grand room for you, one of our finest." And she opened the door and she led the princess inside and she showed her the bed. Now the princess was a little bit surprised. In her kingdom, they only slept with one mattress and one quilt on the bed. But she was in a different kingdom, so maybe they did things differently here. And so she thanked the queen very much, and she changed into the nightgown the queen lent her, and she climbed up the ladder into the bed, and she laid down to sleep. Now, true princesses are gentle, and they're kind, and they're wise, and they're pretty. But they're also a little bit delicate and sensitive. And as the princess laid there in the bed, she felt like something was poking her in the back. And so she rolled over and laid on a different part of the bed. And then she felt like something was poking her in the side. And it didn't matter where she moved on the bed or how she rolled or where she laid, she always felt like something was poking her. And she could tell that these were soft mattresses and eiderdown quilts, so they should not have been hard, but something was poking her, and she did not get much sleep that night. Well, the next morning when she came down to breakfast, the king and the queen and the prince greeted her and said, "Good morning. How did you sleep last night?" "Oh, well, good morning. Well, you see, she didn't really want to say that there was something wrong with the bed because the king and the queen and the prince had been so very kind to let her stay with them, and it would not be polite to complain. But she also didn't want somebody else to try to sleep in that bed and to have the terrible, lumpy, whatever that was in the bed. And so finally she said, "Your Majesties, may I be honest with you?" And the queen said, "Of course, my dear, please do." And she said, "Well, I tried to sleep. I tried all night long, but there was something in the bed. You need to have those mattresses checked. Something was hard, and I felt, didn't matter where I moved to or where I laid on the bed, I felt like something was poking me all night long." Well, the king and the queen simply smiled at each other, and the prince jumped up from the table and he said, "Oh, good, you are a true princess." And then they told her what they had done. Well, the princess was a little bit surprised that there had been a princess test and she hadn't realized it, but she rather liked the prince and he rather liked her. And so when he asked her if she would be his princess and help him rule the kingdom when the time came, she thought about it for a few moments and then she said, yes. And so the prince and the princess were married. And the bean, they took that out of the bed and they put it in the royal museum. And the prince and princess ruled very wisely when they became the king and the queen. And if you would go to the Royal Museum, you would see the bean that had helped them to come together. And actually, I think it might still be there. And that is the story of The Princess and the Bean by Hans Christian Andersen. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll join us again on Friday at 3 p.m. Central Daylight Time. We will have another story for you from somewhere around the world. We'll see you on Friday. Have a great day. Bye.